Okay, so we're here at a new Mishnah in Bava Metzia, Daf Yud Aleph, and welcome, Michael. Welcome back.
Thank you. Very nice to be back.
Yeah, Mazal Tov on your baby boy. Wait, did we hear the name?
Ezra.
Ezra. Very
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
Should
He's
bring
fortunately we are all doing very well.
Baruch Hashem. Very good. Nice to hear. All right, so we're in this Mishnah here. And the Gemara. So why don't I ask Jacob to start us off with the Mishnah here?
Yeah.
Ra'a otan ratzin.
Yeah. Ra'a otan rotin achar metzia. So if someone sees people running after a found object, achar tzvi shavor, achar gozlo shlo parchu, vamar zachta li sadi zachta lo. So if it's after an injured deer, after chicks that have not learned to fly, and he says, my field merits for me. His field merits for him. Hayat Svi Ratz Kedarko, O Shahayu Gozlo Mafrichin, the Amar Zachta Li Sadi, Lo Amar Klum. So if the deer was running normally, or if the chicks had started flying, and he said that he said my field merits for me, he didn't say anything.
Right. So wait, I have a question. First of all, in the second part of the Mishnah, it seems like there's two things. In the first part, are there two things or are there three things? Now, how do you read that first line? Ra'a otan ratzin achar metzia achar tzvi achar gozla. How do you punctuate that?
I was understanding that as like a colon after Metzia.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking. In other words, Ra Otan Ratzin Achar Metzia. And then we have to explain which Metzia.
Exactly.
Exactly. It's a call. It's like a title. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have two things. It's a tzvi and who has a broken leg, or birds that can't fly.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Well, first of all, what does Rashi say? Look at Rashi.
Achar tzvi shavor, dehu dumia dimitzia, she'eno yachol rotz, u'mishtamer b'toch hasada, im lo yitluhu achirim. Since it's
Okay.
similar to a Metzia, since it isn't able to run and it's guarded in its field if others don't take it.
Perfect. All right. So what is the Mishnah teaching us? First of all, is it talking about a sadeh? Is it talking about a chatzer mishtameret or not a chatzer mishtameret?
I think, well, partly based on the Gemara, but I think also this Rashi, the chatzer is not itself mistameret necessarily.
Right. I think you're right. It's a chatzer. It's not mishtameret.
Yeah.
So does it? What is? So why does it matter that the leg of the deer is broken?
Because that creates, even though the field is not misdemerit, because if it's broken, the leg is broken, then that creates a sense that it somehow creates a way that it is misdemerit.
Right.
It's going to move. It's not going to leave the field.
I don't like the field. It's like a field that's capable of being shomer, such a thing.
I don't think it's necessarily about the mishtameret here, because the whole idea, and we'll get into this more in the Gemara, but the whole idea of a chater mishtameret also applies to totally immobile things, right? The distinction between a chater mishtameret and a chater she'ena mishtameret and the rules around that applies even to just an immobile object. I think the notion seems to be also that like the entire notion of a kinyan chater, right, of a physical place acquiring for you, is premised on the notion of something being meaningfully in that place, right? That like something that darts in and out of it in like 2 seconds is not meaningfully enough in that chater to say that that land can acquire it for you when it could be out of that land in another second.
So
right?
wait, are you saying that if a deer would jump into my chatzer mishtameret, it would have the same dinim? It would be the same dinim of whether it's broken leg or not broken leg.
Potentially, right? We'll get into this also. I think this is not a spoiler alert because I don't think we'll have time to look at it in the next week. So if you'll forgive me, I'll mention something that we're probably not going to see inside, which is Rabbi Yochanan talking about the Hu Yeshiyachol Lagian. That he says this applies. Our Mishnah applies when he could have, if he wanted to, reached the animal. And there's like 2 different ways of reading that principle, right? One is reading it as explaining the difference between the Resha and the Seifa, and one is as limiting the Resha, right? You can either read it as like, even when the deer has a broken leg.
Wait, first of all, what you're saying is very important. What you're saying is that our criteria is that he can get to it before the other people who are his competitors,
right?
Or before it will get out of the chatzer, let's say.
Yeah,
before
I think
it'll get out of the chatzer.
Before
it'll get out of the chatzer. In other words, because a deer with a broken leg is not completely immobile. He can hobble outside of the field.
Well, so that's what I'm saying about, I think it can either be limiting the Resha or explaining the distinction, right? You could either read it as like, even a deer that's hobbling, there can be different levels of how fast that deer is or how big your sadeh is or whatever it is, that like, even if it's hobbling fast enough that like you couldn't catch it before it left, you still couldn't acquire it.
Isn't that the Tosfot too? The first Tosfot that's right there?
Well, so we'll get into that, but there's also like another way of reading it is that, and I think the Tosfot, that is their default approach to Rabbi Yochanan's psak. But the other way of reading it is that that's basically a way of explaining the principle behind these two. Why is the deer with the broken leg different than the normally running deer? It's that we sort of are using that as an example of a case where we assume you could overtake it before it left the field, right? That even though you don't have to have overtaken it, we require this principle of like, it is meaningfully enough stuck in this space that you could go and reach it while it is still in your physical space.
Okay, so wait a second, let's analyze this. You're saying that in the first case where the deer is broken or the birds can't fly, Zachta li sade zachala. So he says Zachtala. He can acquire these things because he can reach them before they can get out of the field. And if it would be a chatzer mishtamer, if it was his backyard with a fence around it, what would be the din then? Wait, I don't hear you.
Just realized I was muted. I think theoretically the notion, oh hi baby, would be that if the deer is then trapped in the chatzer, then it wouldn't matter whether its leg is broken or not. If the deer could, again, like that basically mishtameret, I think, well, there are some Rishonim that get into the distinctions between these, but if the deer
what if it's a very feisty deer? Let's say like a very feisty deer jumps into my backyard, and then he's in my chatzer. It's got a fence around it, and then he hops out. And while he was in the thing, I said, I didn't say anything because a chatzer can acquire without even my knowledge. And then he hops out of it and falls into the net. And my neighbor grabs him from the net and says, it's mine. And I say, Mo, it's mine. It was in my chatzer for a minute. What would you say about that case? Would you say that the Chatzer acquired it for him?
I would have to double check a couple of the sources, but I'm pretty sure that it's not considered to be mishtameret vis-a-vis the deer if it's something the deer can get out of, like automatically. Right? That like we see a lot of there's a like
You're saying mishtameret is relative to the thing. So what about this? What if a diamond falls out of heaven into my, just I'm walking along in my field and a diamond falls into my field, and it's not a chatzer mishtameret for whatever reason. It's not a fence around it. It's just an open field, but it's my field, and this diamond falls into it. Now maybe I saw it. I didn't even see it. Now the diamond's not going anywhere.
Well, right, but we're getting to the sense there's like multiple elements, and I also in a sec I want to take a pause and I want to review a couple of the Rishonim that I'm thinking about to make sure that I'm 100% on this. But I know that there are some.
You don't have to quote Rishonim. We can just.
No,
I want to just.
I can give my
like
svara,
Albert Einstein.
also,
We'll just think about what makes sense.
I can give my own svara, but there's also some interesting things that I've looked at that I want to review because I think they have interesting formulations. But I think that there's the notion of mishtameret as being about how well does the thing keep this thing in it versus how well does it guard it from others are related but different criteria, right? Something that depending on
the diamond is not protected from other people coming in.
Exactly.
But the field does seem to be preventing the diamond from running away.
Right. So the diamond can't move. But nonetheless, we don't consider that open field to be like everyone, like there's different opinions as to what exactly is a chatzer mishtameret.
That's why I was talking about it. Like, that's why I brought up this case, because it seems like it's similar to the deer case where it's a field, the deer comes into the field, but because it's in other words, because the field is like, it's almost like the gavra, it's like almost like a hefza gavra kind of thing. The field as a hefza is not a good shomer for this deer, but the deer as a gavra, the deer itself is disabled, so therefore it sort of turns the field into a good guardian for it.
And I think
going back to
wait, let Jacob go.
I think Rashi is written very well, with the im lo yitluhu acherim, because it's not, because I think there's idea. I think a chatzer mishtameret, there's idea. It acquires in a way, even if you don't know, and it acquires in a way that others can't acquire for you. There's still with the Tzvi Shabor, you still have to say the field merits for you. The field acquires it for you. Because it's not guarded in a way that others can't take it.
So going off of that,
wait, I don't understand what you're saying, Jacob. You're saying the field does guard?
There's a particularity of how it is guarded. It's guarded because it's in your field and it can't leave your field by itself. That if you see it, you can say, my field acquires this for me. And then it's yours, but it's not I think there's the aspect of mishtameret, like a chatzer mishtameret, where you just acquire for it. Presumably, others could not take that object.
In other words, wait. Rashi is saying he's using the word mishtamer.
It is.
And he's also saying that the deer can't run out.
Yeah.
Hudunya de Metzia. It's like a diamond that fell into your field. She'eno yachola roots, because he cannot run. Umishtamer b'toch hasadeh, and he is the field. According to Rashi, it's true that somebody else could come and grab it.
Exactly.
But in the field, that's irrelevant according to Rashi. It is mishtamer because it can't get out.
Again, I think Rashi is using mishtamer confusingly, lav dafka in that sense. I think I'm agreeing with Jacob here, but going back to what I was initially saying, I think that there's two different axes and they're both accounted for, but they're not the same. There's mishtameret, which we're about to see in the Gemara, which is about, is this guarded from others, right? That like a chatzer mishtameret is like, oh, this is walled off. Or depending on who you ask, some seem to think it's only if it's walled off. Some seem to think if it's not walled off, but there's a guard. But that it's walled off in a way that you can prevent others from getting to it, and that's what's considered mishtameret. And then
But
there's the
again,
question of-
you're bringing in this in, but it doesn't say that in Rashi.
no, I'm talking about what we're going to get in the Gemara, which is when we actually use the
I didn't
language
get to the
of
Gemara yet.
Chatzer.
I'm
No,
just
but I
still
finished the
analyzing the Mishnah.
I know, but you're using the term of Chatzer Mishtameret, and we can't talk about that without talking about where it's discussed. So the Chatzer Hamishtameret, I think that's how it's generally defined, is that it's being defined as it's guarded for you against others. Whereas I think the main thing that our Mishnah is specifying when talking about like the Tzvi Shavor as opposed to the Tzvi Ratz Kedarko is this question of like, does the Chatzer, or whatever we're calling the Chatzer here, meaningfully contain the item? And that's different than the Mishtameret of a Chatzer HaMishtameret that we're about to see in the Gemara, but is its own criteria that we also require.
Okay,
right?
it's possible that's correct.
Of this.
It's definitely possible that Rashi is talking about a different aspect, nothing to do with what makes something a Chatzer Mishtameret, but he's just using that word. Okay, it's possible. Can't prove that's not true. Okay, so back to the Mishnah. These birds or deer can't get out of it. We didn't see anything about what we've been mentioning about whether he gets there before somebody else, because what's it called, Mishtamer? Is it Mishtamer forever? You know, is it within a reasonable amount of time that I could get to it? What is called, you know, what Rashi calls Mishtamer b'toch hasadeh. So wait, so you want to see here, Jacob? Why don't you look at that Tosfot? Zachtalo.
Yes, Zachtalo. Nira Alpha Gav Delo Amar Zachtali Zachtalo. So we see that even though he didn't say Zachtali, that he still is Zocha. He still merits it, or however we translate Zocha. Kedam Rinan La'ayah.
Wait, so, yeah. What do you remember? So he says La'el Daf Yud. Well, go. You can read a little more. Yeah.
Yeah. E Tikun Rabbanan Delikne Kilo Amar My Have.
Okay, so stop there. So let's think about this. What is Tosfos trying to say here?
So even though because of what we say on Daf Yud Amud Aleph, which I don't fully remember.
Well, remember we talked about how the guy should acquire it when he falls on the things,
Right.
and then we said, but he didn't say Zachali, and then we said, what do we care if he didn't say Zachali? As long as there's a takana de Rabbanan that he's acquiring. He doesn't have to pronounce the words. So Tosfos is saying, I mean, you could say Tosfos is comparing apples and oranges, because he's comparing a takana de Rabbanan of Arba Amos with our field, or our field that he's got this, that he maybe the field he does have to say, maybe by the Arba Amos he doesn't. But Tosfos is saying no, there is a equivalence between those cases. So I want you to tell me what's the equivalence.
Well, I mean, the way on the previous stuff, like we explored Chatzer and Arba Amot together as if they were with the Tana, they were. So there is, at least in the phrasing of the Gemara, an equivalence to that.
Right, we're all the time comparing the functionality. This is actually, I heard from Rav Schachter from YU. He said when the rabbis make takanas, the takana has to function according to the mechanisms of existing Torah laws. They don't invent new mechanisms. They apply existing mechanisms to new cases.
Right. So if anything, it's not even just they're comparable. It should be I think the Rashba says it should be a kal v'chomer because chatzer is d'oraita and arba amot derabanan, right? So there is like a logic to saying if you don't need to say it for this derabanan mechanism, that's
Right.
either kal v'chomer you don't need to say it for d'oraita, or that's because you don't need to say it when something is d'oraita.
Right. Okay. Yeah, you could say a kal v'chomer, but you don't have to. You could just say they should be equivalent. They should be that if you can acquire by your Abba almost without speaking, then your field should be able to acquire without you speaking, even though it's not a chatzer mishtameret.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's not a chatzer mishtameret, I mean, with all this is with this proviso, which Alexi and all of us were debating just now, is this field a mishtameret because it's capable of mishamer this, item, or as Lexi proposed, no, it's still not a chatzer mishtameret because it doesn't keep other people out. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to go back to that, but as I'm saying it, I'm thinking that maybe the reason that we're worried about people keeping other people out is that's a way of guarding my stuff that's in the field. In other words, I have my piles of wheat, and it's mishtamer from them that they shouldn't come in and get my things, and then my things would go out. So ultimately, it's almost equivalent. Keeping people out is a way of keeping my things in because they'll come into my field and take my things.
I think they're related, but as we see, are not like fully identical, right? Because
I don't mean to say they're fully identical, but they kind of
as we're about to
functionally.
see in our Gemara, Shmuel thinks that our whole Mishnah is talking about what's eno mishtameret, and that's.
I don't want to go into this again. I don't want to go into it again. We already went into it, but I'm just saying that I presented your idea, and I'm saying that it makes sense, but there's also a way of seeing it as equivalent. You could say it's not equivalent. They're both possible. And I'm just presenting that we don't need to decide right here and now. I'm just putting out both possibilities, and I'm trying to, put them both on the table so that we can look at them and have them there. So what is the Tosfos saying? Back to the Tosfos. He's saying, what does he say? Jacob, go for it again. The first part.
So
I want to get back into the Tosfos now.
Yes. Well,
what's his question?
I think the idea is if kind of building a little bit on Rashi, that if the Tzvi is Mishtamer B'Tof Sadeh, then why would he should acquire it
right
without saying anything? Why do we need that he says something?
Exactly. Now wait a second. Was he? What about the idea that he's standing there? I mean, is he there? Ra'ah. It says Ra'ah. The Mishnah says Ra'ah otan ratzim achar Metzia.
Yeah. So
he sees other people running after a Metzia in his field, and those people sort of indicated to him that there's something there. And he says, well, whatever they're running after, if it's something that my field could contain, like it's then I want to acquire it. I don't even know if he saw the thing.
It seems to be more specifically that they just don't think a Kenyan Chatzer ever acquires a speech act, and they're using the text.
Who's they? Wait, who are you talking? Who's they?
The Tosfot don't think that a Kenyan Chatzer ever acquires a speech act, and they're proving that
ever acquires a speech act. What's a speech act?
Speech act, as in a verbal declaration.
Okay.
They don't seem to think that
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Means that, and they're proving that both from the Arba Amot thing and from another thing they're about to cite that, no, it happens automatically. You don't need to declare anything.
Precisely. Okay, thank you, Jacob. Continue.
Right. Ve'ein lomar dehatam hainu mishum denafalo alaha degale v'daite shirota liknot. And there isn't to say that there it's because he fell on it and that revealed his knowledge they wanted to acquire. About hacha mi emar derota liknot. The rabba masma de'ilo.
No. So that's his answer. That's his pushback. Oh. Wait. Okay. So he says, in other words, aval hacha mi emar derota liknot.
Right.
In other words, you might say that over there, the reason he didn't have to announce is because
Yeah.
he fell on it. He fell on the item, which shows that he's trying to acquire it. But if he hadn't fallen on it, and in our case, he's just standing there, maybe he has to make this verbal declaration.
Right.
When all declarations are, well, I guess, are all declarations verbal? No, I guess the Declaration of Independence was a written declaration. But he has to make this verbal declaration.
Yeah.
No, I'm just thinking because in Latin, I think the word that the declaration comes from, it means to speak. But anyway,
I'm pretty sure it's been a long time since I was doing my classics major. I should know this one.
I think I also studied classics, and I think that it means the same. Anyway, but that's a side point. So you might say that the declaration that he has to declare is necessary here because he didn't do any other act to show that he wants to acquire it.
Yeah.
Now he goes on to, he says, no, but and that's, by the way Tosfos, that's the way the Rambam learned it. If you remember, the Rambam learned that the falling on the item was an indication of that it was like a greater reason to think that he should acquire it, even though Rambam writes, even though he fell on it, he doesn't acquire it, as though the falling is an indication. In other words, the Rambam, we learned that when we looked the Rambam on that. And then he says, the Adar, now he's going to say, no, I don't agree with you, Mr. Rambam. The Adarabba.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The Adarabba masmel ayel de lo nafal kanad fe. On the other hand, we learned earlier that if he didn't fall, his acquisition is better.
If he didn't fall, right? If he didn't fall.
Right.
If he didn't fall, it would be more reason to think he should acquire. So don't tell me that the falling is what makes him acquire. The falling actually, the way Tosfos reads the Gemara is as a reason not to acquire the fall. And therefore, don't tell me that here there's no indication that he wants it unless he speaks. Also over there was no indication because the falling actually did not indicate that he wanted to acquire. That's the way Tosfos is trying to read it. Okay.
Yeah. The Afal Gav Delo Amar Akne, the Od.
And even though he didn't say, I want to acquire it.
Exactly.
So you see over there clearly that he didn't have to say Akne, and he can acquire it. So why here do we have to say it?
Yeah. The Od, the Amar Rabbi Yossi Bar Rabbi Nina, Tatsero Shaladam Konolo Shlomidato. And further, that Rabbi Yossi said in the name of Rabbi Nina that the courtyard of a person acquires for him without his knowledge. So if it's without his knowledge, you shouldn't have to say anything.
Right. If you don't know about it, you certainly can't make any pronouncements about it.
And I guess Daito might also be without his intention, like whether he wants it or not.
Right. Right. He's acquired him even like maybe without his not right. He doesn't even say that he wants it. He doesn't. Well, I wouldn't say that if he doesn't want it. What if he doesn't want it? Would it still acquire for him? Perhaps, yeah. As long as it's a good thing.
Yeah.
If it's a bad thing, maybe it wouldn't acquire. But if it's a good thing, but he just doesn't want it, maybe it would still acquire. By the way,
the assumption is that they're always like, as in like the definitionally, the whole thing it's functioning on from there is the Zachen La'adam Shela B'fanav, right? So it has to be something that's considered.
Well, for sure, for sure, it has to be something that's beneficial. The question is, what if even though it's beneficial, he doesn't want it? Like he's an I don't know.
If it happens without dot, I think we have to say it works even.
His wife told him, don't buy any more, glasses. And it's a beautiful glass, and it came in, and he doesn't want to acquire it because he might get in trouble. But
in general, since
it's
we
a good thing.
Categorical statements, right? That like we treat the we treat the get as like chavin, even though there's a lot of women for whom they would see that as a benefit.
Exactly.
Because they're like, oh, you lose economic support.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. It could acquire for him even as long as it's a good thing, even if he personally doesn't want it, as long as it's a good thing. But now notice that he also uses the word chatzer here. Dammit, right? He said,
Yeah.
"The Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina chatzer shel Adam koneh lo shelo midato."
Mhm.
So wait a second. So what's a simple answer for Tosfos? What answer could you give just to anybody? What answer could you just say? I mean, it's just sort of he's bringing a proof from Chatzer. He seems to be clearly saying, how does he bring a proof regarding a field from a Chatzer?
Yeah.
Well, a field functions like a chatzer for acquisition. The real problem is that, as we established in the Gemara, that's referring to a chatzer hamishtameret. A field
Exactly.
is a chatzer she'ena mishtameret.
No, but when Rav Yossi Amar, when Adam Rav Yossi bar Chanina Chatzer shel Adam koneh lo shelo midaito, he was not referring to a field that is not mishtameret. He was referring to a Chatzer that is mishtameret.
Correct. That's how our
So
Gemara.
we're talking about a field that isn't
I'm saying
mishtameret.
It's
So
not
then
chatzer
why
versus-
would he bring a proof from that? Maybe dafka speaking is something you need to do when it's a field that's not mishtameret. I mean, the problem. What's the problem with saying that? The problem with saying that is like, why? But we have to give a rationale for that. Why? It should be enough that the field becomes mishtameret because this is a broken animal, that it functions like a chatzer, and therefore it's no longer functionally different from a chatzer mishtameret in any way. So therefore, you shouldn't have to say any kind of statements, just like you don't buy a chatzer mishtameret. So that's why I'm saying that the Tosfos seems to understand that this has become a hainu hach. It has become a chatzer mishtameret because the deer, either like Rashi said, which is that you cannot get out of it, or it can't get out of it before you get to it. That's where I see that it is becoming a chatzer mishtameret. Anyway, Alma, go on. Alma, afal gav.
Alma, afal gav delo amar kani. That we see that it's even though he didn't say he acquired it. V'hacha naka mishum seifa. Dafilu.
Even though he didn't say, I guess you have to add the word anything, kani.
He acquires it.
Or maybe he means to say, afal gav delo amar kani li sadeh. I don't know. But I'm not sure which way to read it, but it doesn't really matter. Afal gav delo amar hu kane. Even though he didn't say anything, he kane. V'hacha neka. So why is it in our place that he says kane? So here's his answer. Hacha nakat.
Hacha naka mishum seifa. Dafilu amar kevan derech kedarko lo
No,
kane.
derats. I have derats. Is this derech or derats?
Oh, derats. Yes. Yes. So here, we answer, we can quote because of the end, that even if he said, if he said I acquire, since it's running in its normal way, he does not acquire.
How does that? So he's saying in the Reisha, ein hachanami, he doesn't have to say anything, even though it says that he said it, he doesn't. But in the Seif, it wants to tell you that even though he says something, it still doesn't work because the Svi is rats. He's running around. He's getting away.
Well,
so you can't. Yeah. So Jacob, what do you? Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, I think it works well knowing the next Tosfot and how we're talking about the idea of Svi Rats Kedarko, that's Orcha de Milta. But
So read the next Tosfot. But I have still a little bit of problem with this Tosfot. But go on to the next Tosfot. No problem.
Hayat Svi Rats Kedarko, Huadin Afilu Svi Vor, Im Rats Achra Ve'in Magio, Im Rats Achra Ve'in Magio.
In other words, right? He's saying, in other words, it doesn't matter whether it can run or not run. It's just a question of whether he is capable of catching it before it gets away, before it gets out of his field.
Yeah.
I mean, if he could catch it, then it doesn't. So he's kind of disagree. I mean, I don't disagree with Rashi. He's phrasing it differently from Rashi. Rashi seems to say that it can't get out. And he's maybe clarifying in Rashi, well, it can't get out before you get to him. But the truth is, what does it mean, hu adin? Hu adin afilu tzvi shavur im ratz acharav vein magia ela vein magia. That what would the din be?
That you
That he
don't.
wouldn't acquire. That he wouldn't acquire. If it's shavur in such a way that it's hobbling, and he's also hobbling, he's a slow-moving human, and he can't get to it, then it's called a sviratz. All a question of whether you could get it. Now, what about if you could? Is it relevant to the other people who are chasing it? I think not. It doesn't matter that they're closer to it and they can get to it faster. You still acquire it as long as it's in your field, provided that you could get to it if those people wouldn't be there. Right? Those people, that's the whole point, actually. That's the whole point of this. There's other people. Why are you saying this? Because you see these other people running and you say, if they would just disappear, I'd be able to get this seat. But they're going to get it before me. I want to get it first. And even if you say, but if it's really going to, what if they could get it, but you couldn't get it? So that's this case. It's ratza. It's running in a way that, let's say they could, if nobody could get it, then obviously lo zacha. What do you mean? It's going to run into the woods and it's gone. It's talking obviously about a case where they could get it, even though it's ratza, because they're closer to it, or they have a net or something. And you couldn't get to it, then your words don't help. So that's why it says nakat the kisharat kedarko ein megio. In other words, it's orka de milta. It's just a normal case. It's the simplest way to understand it, that a tzvi is running away and you couldn't get to it. So wait, so what do you? So how does that help you with the previous tosafot?
I think we have to. Maybe I don't need it actually, because I think the idea is I think the previous tosafot was just so it had the parallel structure in certain ways, so we could get to this idea that something can be in your field, and you could say something and not acquire it. But I think it does help to understand that you still, I think, because there's this possibility that an animal could be in your field and you not acquire it, I think it might be affirming you need this other aspect of declaration.
I mean, they seem to have, I think they've basically just set up their paradigm, which is that if im ratza charav magio, right, if the thing is moving slowly enough that you could overtake it, then your field acquires even if you don't say anything. And im ratza charav ve'eno magio, if you ran after it and you wouldn't be able to overtake it, then even if you did say something, you wouldn't acquire. Right?
So it comes out that the speaking is irrelevant, totally irrelevant in both the Reisha and the Seifa. So what, right? But yet there seems to be some kind of havamina that Tosfos has, that if it wouldn't say it that I might have thought that the Seifa, what if it just would have left out entirely any discussion of talking?
Right.
What mistake would I have made? I would have made a mistake that in the Seifa where it was running, I thought that I would acquire it because even though I couldn't get to it, but I said I want it, then I acquire it, let's say when those other people do throw the net over it. And why would I think that? Why would I think that? It's not echatzer mishtameret according to our definition, because it's able to get out before I can get to it. So why would speaking, where have we seen anywhere that's speaking? Like, I don't understand Tosfos. Does anyone have a trouble? I mean,
yeah.
It does seem kind of weird. Those are saying, I would have thought that speaking would have helped. And then you have to tell me that it won't. I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, maybe a normal person on the street might think that, but do we have any halacha that speaking acquires?
I mean, not by itself, but like, I mean, again, there's like,
Well, it's not a Chatzer Mishtameret. What else is going to be acquiring it for me?
well, again, the notion of your Chatzer is acquiring
But not
combined.
here because it's going to run out.
No. But well, no, is again, nobody thinks anywhere that I've seen that a speech act by itself with no other element acquires. The question is whether a speech act is a necessary but insufficient element to the acquisition. Is it something you need combined with some other form of acquisition? Or
But I have no reason to think that it. Tosfos seems to say that he would prefer the Mishnah in the Reisha not to have said that he said anything, and in the Seifa just should say afilu that he said something doesn't work. So why is the Mishnah need, according to Tosfos, to try to refute this erroneous idea that I would have had that speaking would work? I would never have thought, if the Mishnah had left it out, I would not have ever thought it because I don't have any other Mishnah that would have told it to me. So I would just start making up things. I would just start making up that speaking somehow acquires. See what I'm saying? Well, we do have one thing I could think of. We kind of have speaking. Where do we have one thing? Is there any place you think of speaking that kind of acquires? Well, I don't know. If a man gives a woman a pruta without saying anything. Oh, exactly, Sarah. That's what I was thinking.
Sorry,
If a man
my
gives
voice is somewhat suspect, but Kiddushin.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. But wait, but Kiddushin, well, what if you give a pruta? So now I'm just thinking about
Kiddushin,
it.
the problem is it's the other way around.
right, but also in Kiddushin, it's not just your words, it's your words with another thing. If you
Well,
say
no, but I'm asking the other way. Are the words
Don't-
necessary at all? What if I have been discussing
Yeah.
marriage with this woman, or a man has been discussing marriage with this woman for a long time, and then he gives her a gift? Don't we say that without saying anything? We say that it is chal. So even that example, I was thinking of that example, but now that I talk about it with you guys, I don't think it is a good example because that it's not necessary.
Right, I mean,
Oh, maybe it
but
is.
then I feel
Maybe
like-
the other is just maybe the environment is a tachlit,
Yeah.
is a replacement for a speech, but it's also a kind of speech. So maybe
Right,
the
but
speech.
I think there's a Sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
No,
Okay.
just that when we say like, Oskimbo Toinyan or whatever it is by Kiddushin, that's just another way of saying, well, they didn't say Hariyat Mekudeshet. They just said a bunch of other stuff, which
Right.
effectuated the thing. It's just a different set of words, but it's still a speech act.
Right.
I mean,
I think so. We would think it's
at
similar
least
to,
by some definitions of speech act. I think like whatever, you can like go into the jail Austin of it all at a different point, but
wait. So what do you want to say, Michael? What do you want to add?
Just very similar point. Just that the words may not be there in that moment, but the context kind of acts as a stand-in. If you were to if the same man were to go up to someone else and hand her pruta, we would not treat those two as equivalent acts of kiddushin because one of them has kind of Sarah was saying, like all of these other speech acts that are previously involved that sub in for this particular moment.
Right. But of course, if a woman would be in a Hatzer Mishtameret and you gave her a pruta, you still would have to say the speech action. In other, it's not really parallel. The speech action is just explaining why you're giving her the pruta, that it's not a gift, but that it's for the purpose of kinyan. But it's not that it is affecting the kinyan. And it's not like it could be replaced by a Hatzer Mishtameret, with which Tosfos seems to say that for sure that you would have thought that it could be replaced by that. So I'm still left with a little bit of a doubt about this Tosfos. I don't quite understand
Yeah.
why I would have thought that speeches would have changed everything and I would acquire these running deer through my field just because I said something. But Tosfos, that's not the kind of question that's the question that I like to ask. That's not the kind of question that halachic people want to ask. Halachic people want to just clarify. Tosfos says the Amira is irrelevant, right? That is the conclusion. And other Rishonim might say that no, the Amira is relevant. Fine. But I'm just questioning what's the rationale. Tosfos seems to be doing this because of he doesn't think that Amira in the first part was relevant, so it can't have been relevant in the second part. Fine. Okay. Let's go on. Let's go on.
But
Michael,
I just
Jake.
quite. So if Tosfot is saying that the Amira isn't relevant, then what is the function of it in the Mishnah at all? Like why, why isn't Tosfot asking the question, why do we bother mentioning this at all if it doesn't actually either affect Kinyan or indicate my desire that my chutz, that my field or my chatzar or whatever it is, effect, it makes Kinyan for me. Presumably, I might be in the case where I am standing there at the edge of my field and a wounded deer hobbles across my field, and I actually don't want to acquire this deer. I want to leave my property because I don't want to be, for example, responsible for the health department coming after me for it or something like that. I don't care. But the point is, like, what is the function of it here, if not to indicate intent for this purpose, as opposed to excluding the incidental or accidental appearance of a wounded deer on my property?
Well, the Tosfot do answer that at the end of their thing. They have the v'hachanakat, right? Their explanation, not necessarily the most satisfying, but like their explanation is that he wanted to teach the case of Amar Zakali Sadi in the Seifa to prove that in a case where you couldn't reach the deer, even if you make a speech act, it still doesn't work. And so for the sake of parallels, it includes that same phrase in the Resha, but that ultimately, in neither case does it make a difference, right? That it teaches that like in the Resha, you didn't even need to say it and it still works. And in the Seifa, even if you do say it, it doesn't work.
Right. So, yeah. So, right. It doesn't have any effect. The answer to another way of saying the answer, Josie, is just to say the Havamina is that, in other words, if I hadn't said it in the Resha, in the Seifa, if I hadn't said that it doesn't work, I might have thought that it does work. So in the second part of the Mishnah where it talks about the running deer, it had to say it so that I shouldn't erroneously conclude that speech might have helped. It was because he was quiet that it didn't work, but had he spoken, it would work. So he'd say, no, even if he says something, it doesn't work. But you're also pointing to another question, which is, what if he specifically says, I don't want to acquire? Well, he may not need to say that. If there's other people running after the animal and they catch it, and he even he doesn't need to say, I don't acquire. We're not talking about a case where there's no other people there. We're talking about a case where there are other people who are expressing a definite interest in this item. So he doesn't really need to say, I don't want it. They'll just take it. Okay. Right. Just like I just read a Sipur of Tzadikim, Nassan Adler, somebody came into his house and stole some wood from him. And he noticed that the person was going out with wood, and he followed him and said, it's Hefker, it's you can have it. And then he went, in other words, he didn't want it. He told him it's Hefker. He didn't want the guy to be over on Geneva, so he wanted to quickly tell him it's Hefker. And then he put up a sign in front of his house that he realized that other people, he might be asleep and somebody might steal something from his house. And then he wouldn't have a chance to tell them that he's moichel. So he put up a sign in front of his house, everything in my house is Hefker. So that nobody should ever be a sinner based on stealing from him. I don't think anybody wants to steal from him, but at least I hope not. But that's what he said. He said everything in his house is Hefker. So I guess in that sense, your house, which is certainly a chatzah mishtameret, doesn't acquire for you if you don't want it to somehow. Anyway, interesting story. Okay, let's go on. Maybe Michael, since you're welcome back, you can read a little of the Gemara for us, if you'd like. Otherwise,
great. Yeah. No, I'm happy to. Okay, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. V'hu she'omed b'tzad sadehu. V'tiknei le sadehu. The Amar Rav Yosef.
Wait. Stop there.
Oh.
So what did Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel say?
Right. This refers to a case where the Baal Sadeh is standing at the edge of the field.
Right. We didn't say explicitly in the Mishnah where the guy was. We did say that he saw something. He could have had a telescope and he could have been very far away. In fact, he had to be near the field. Well, that certainly fits with Tosfot, who said, who said that he has to be able to catch it. So he'd have to be somewhat near the field. But anyway, so why? Yeah, well, I'm actually asking, I'm sort of answering the question I wanted to ask, which is why? Why does he have to be near the field?
I mean, I think Rashi's answer kind of feeds us to the next few lines of the Gemara, but
yeah. So what does Rashi say?
This concept of the Akshavi Mishtamer al Yado, that it's not just a question of, as you said, kind of seeing from afar with the binoculars. There's actually a sense that the Baal Sadeh is kind of meaningfully, spatially interacting with the deer in some way. The deer can't just run straight off the eastern border to the next field. The person standing there and can get in the way in such a way that his presence bounds the field in a more concrete sense.
Well, right.
And I think the other piece of it that may not be explicit, but that feels like part of it is going back to our discussion of, you have a couple other people who are running after the deer or after the chicks, who are a few hundred feet closer, so what does it matter if this guy's yelling out if the other people are the ones who are going to actually grab the animal? I feel like you can also now construct a situation where you say, this guy's in the mix, right? He's also in proximity to the animal, such that there's a way in which he could also be amongst the group of people who are chasing it down, but you're not talking about 3 or 4 people who are chasing down a hefker object with equal claims. You're talking about that group of people chasing down the same animal, where one of them also is the Baal Sadeh.
Right. I think almost this is the source for Tosfos's short Tosfos Hayatz fi Ratz B'Tikadarko that he's saying.
It has to be something that you can catch.
It has to be something that you're able to reach. What about if I see a diamond fall into my field? Now, and then somebody else starts running to get the diamond.
This goes back to the 2 different criteria, right? That also the Tosfot that we read, it's more based off of a statement of Rabbi Yochanan that comes later about the Magian. But that is in addition to, right, that Shmuel establishes our entire Mishnah as being about a case of it being Eno Mishtameret, right? So we have the notion of Mishtameret and we have the notion of Yachol Hagian. And those are 2 different things, but they're both relevant in the Kinyan process.
Okay, thank you. Excellent point. Michael, can you continue reading?
Yeah. Okay. The Tikne Le Sadehu. The Amar Rabbi Yossi by Rabbi Hanina. Fatei Rosh Adam Kanalo Shalomi Dato. Right. So can't we just say that the field acquires the animal without needing him to be at the edge of the field? Right, in accordance with a statement from Rabbi Yossi in the name of Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Hanina, that a person's courtyard can acquire objects for them even without their intention or their consent.
In other words, it seems like it's right. It seems like
irrelevant where he's standing. If it's his field and he says Zachtali Sadi, that should be it.
Right. Now, he seems to be understanding an equivalence between nearing the field and knowledge. In other words, a chatzer, the statement was a chatzer of a person acquires without his knowledge. But it doesn't say without him being there, just as without his knowledge.
Right. So and I feel like Midato here, more so than knowledge, is almost like consent, he doesn't need to do anything because it's already his.
Right. Well, as Lexi pointed out, and as I pointed out, because the thing is good for you.
Right.
So you do have a sort of implicit consent. You want
Right.
things that are good. But it's without his knowledge. Maybe why should knowledge be relevant?
Right. Because I feel like, again, going back to the idea of like Ra'otan Ratzin, right? That there's in the Mishnah, there's this kind of like this moment of discovery that I don't know exactly how it would connect to the idea of da'at quite yet. I think I need to.
Yeah, I think it's a really good. I didn't think of this question when I was learning it on my own, but I think it's a really good question. What the heck is going on here? That's my favorite question. What the heck is going on here? What is the connection between da that a hatzer can acquire with dat has anything to do with getting rid of the requirement of you being nearby? If being nearby is that you could get it, then
you don't even need to know. Then certainly you don't need to be there. Presumably, if you're right there, you know
you might not know. You might not know. You might be reading the newspaper.
The assumption seems to be that, like, the whole point is that it shouldn't matter. If you can acquire with absolutely no knowledge, then who cares if you're there or not? It just seems to be automatic. It's in your chatzer, you acquire. Boom, done.
So then you have to say that when we said that you have to be there, it really meant you had to have knowledge of it.
Well, no, as in, I think that.
Why did you have to be there? Why did we say they had to be there? We just explained, we just thought that maybe the reason you had to be there is so you could get it physically.
Well,
so now maybe we're saying you can acquire it without knowledge, so you certainly can't get it. Okay, that's nice. In other words, if you don't know it's there, then you certainly can't get it. You can't run after that deer because you're busy reading the newspaper.
Right. It just seems to be that, like, if your chatzer can acquire without any knowledge, which would seem to include certainly even you not being there, right? Like, yes, there certainly are potential cases where you're there and you don't know, but probably the majority.
I want to say it a little bit differently. I hear what you're saying. I heard what you're saying, but I want to say it a little differently. I want to say, because if you can acquire without your knowledge, then certainly without knowing about it, you can't get to it at any reasonable time. The deer will escape because you don't even know it's there. You don't have to do. You don't have to have the ability to capture it, because if you don't know about it, you certainly can't capture it. The field captures it for you. So why do you have to be able to capture it, like Tosfot said before the other guy? Your field captures it for you. Your field captures for you, even without you knowing about it. You don't have to be there. You don't have to be there or know about it. Both of those things are things that you need in order to be an active capturer. But you see that if you don't know about it, then you certainly, even if you're there, it wouldn't help. So like you said, it's kol shekei. Even if you're there, it wouldn't help if you didn't know about it. So you certainly can't be capturing it. So the field captures by itself. So let this deer be captured by itself, by your field, and you shouldn't have to be there. I think that's a good way of saying it. All right. Wait, it's 10 o'clock. Let's take a hafsakah here, 5 minutes, and we'll come back. All right, let's continue. So Michael, continue reading from where you were. So we just said that a field, a chatzer, is acquired without your knowledge. So kol shekei, you shouldn't have to be there.
You shouldn't need to, right? You shouldn't need to be in the
and you see, so therefore, by the way, you kind of see that Tosfos is right. I just want to go back to another point we made. Tosfos, it's legitimate for Tosfos to compare to a chatzer mishtameret, our field case. Why? Because the Gemara is doing it. The Gemara is doing it. The Gemara is saying it's a chatzer and it's the same din as a field. Okay. But now it's going to differentiate.
Right. Hane mile b'chatzer mishtameret. Aval chatzer she'ena mishtameret. Iomed b'tzad sadehu in, Ila lo. So, right, this statement of Konelo sadehu shalomi dato refers to a guarded courtyard, but for an unguarded courtyard, if he's standing at the edge of it, then yes, he can acquire the animal that's running in the middle of it. And if he's not standing at the edge of the field, then he cannot acquire the animal.
Right. So maybe we changed what we think the purpose of him being near the field is. Maybe it's not so that he can get the item, but it's so that it becomes mishtamer. Or maybe that's the same thing. Maybe that he can get the item is that he's mishtamer.
Again,
Right,
I'm
again, I
obviously
mean, I wonder.
no, go Michael.
Right, like the question being, to what extent is it about, kind of stam enclosure, or the extent to which it's about being able to prevent something from leaving?
So
Right,
Claire, explain what you mean.
There's still, I'm going to assume that this is that the field is larger than this guy's wingspan. It's not a question of this is like unenclosed courtyard, but it's a question of this Baal Sadek can plausibly prevent people or animals or objects from leaving the field, right? He can kind of intercept as they're moving away.
And he can
whereas the other
call the police if people try to come in.
Right. Whereas I feel like the other option that came to mind is, everyone, right? Like the Baal Sadeh is over here. You've got these other two people who are running, and the deer is in the middle, and they're all trying to like converge on that one spot where the Baal Sadeh moves away from the edge of the field, right? Then it's, in that world, it's a question of his davka, like his physical positioning.
Well, wait a second. When he's on the edge of the field, we're saying he has to be at least on the edge of the field. He could certainly be in the field. No? You don't think so?
No, I was interpreting it as, he is acting in a certain way, like a wall on one side of the field, right?
Oh.
If
so what if the field is many, many acres? What if he's in Texas and he's got like, miles and miles of field? Then would his presence at the edge of the field?
No, because then I don't think it counts as Mishtamer. It's
in other words,
right, because it's too easy for right. Right. I feel like this counts as a Sadera Chatzer Mishtamera if you're talking about someone's backyard in a way that's not true if you've got a 1,000-acre cattle ranch somewhere.
In other words, when we said he has to be on the edge of the field, so when we say on the edge of the field, we didn't really mean it literally. We meant he has to be in a position where he can turn the field effectively into a guarded area by being the guard.
Right. I was assuming Tzad Sadeh basically meant, he is right. He's blocked. The deer is running toward the eastern edge of the field.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
The deer's path on the eastern side, such that the deer cannot like easily exit his property. As opposed to,
so. I really don't think so.
On the north side, you don't think? Okay.
I don't think so. I think that just as yeah, Lexi, go ahead.
Just if people are interested in it, I know I am always advocating this, but if people are interested in looking at some Rishonim, these are some hotly debated issues. Both the question of whether you need to be standing in the field or next to it is a debated issue.
You need to be. Can you be?
No. So everyone agrees that you can be in the field.
That's all I was saying. That's all I was saying.
Some say you need to be in it, and some say you can be next to it but not in it.
All right, but that's
the question.
Right, but that already.
The question of what you're doing, right? What's the relevance of being Omed B'tzad Sadehu?
Yeah.
Right? We can look at the Rashi. He's very clear about what he thinks. He thinks that it makes it mishtamer. that like you standing there turns it into a Chatzer Mishtamer. But
Why?
there's others, because again, seemingly he thinks Mishtamer is not just about a physical sort of enclosure, but about like there was like being like a guard, right? That like you standing there is essentially like you like guarding the field. Whereas there are others.
Well, show us the Rashi. Show us the Rashi.
So this is the Rashi on Iomed B'tzad Sadehu in, right? Where he says Dachshav Mishtamer Tzayado.
Right. But he doesn't say much more than that. He doesn't say why it's Mishtamer.
He doesn't.
And he doesn't answer the question of what about a 10,000-mile field?
Correct. He seems to just treat it like a sort of
Is it a technical thing that if you're there, then the field becomes quote unquote Mishtamer, even if you're a cripple, even if you can't do anything? And what is it all? Is it a technical thing, or is it only if you are a young active person who can go and call and shake people away and do stuff, and it's a field that's manageable by one person?
Again,
There's all these extra things.
If you don't
are
like
not
the
said.
Rashi explanation, there are
What?
other explanations. I don't know. If you're interested, there's a good Rosh on this, where he understands the whole mechanism of what's happening very differently.
Can I also just add, maybe this is getting too in the weeds, but in those Rishonim or anywhere else, right? Like, do they get into the particulars of the language of B'tzad Sadehu as opposed to something like B'toch Sadehu in terms of why they're using, right? Because I think that's part of what was making me think about the Baal Sadeh as kind of being, on the edge in order to guard and in order to enclose, as opposed to saying, kind of in the vicinity to exert, kind of to exert the concept of ownership, but not necessarily a physical boundary, a physical limitation on where the animal can go. That distinction gets picked up anyway.
I don't think anybody says that being on the edge of the field is specifically required. It could be also in the field. But Lexi might know different.
Sorry, that what?
I don't think that Michael was asking if anybody specifically wants you to be at the edge of the field, and it would be no good if you're in the field because you're no longer a good ball.
Or just or really just the language, right? If anyone picks up on B'tzad Sadehu as opposed to like B'toch Sadehu, and whether to understand those to be functionally the same thing, or do those terms have different meanings?
I think,
right, like if this said B'toch Sadehu, I would read it different.
Yeah, I think if anything, it sort of goes the opposite way, and that I don't know of anyone who uses that to say that, like, if you're on the side of it, yes, but not in the middle of it. But I do think some of the people who argue that, like, you don't need to be in it, you can be outside of it but near it, use that language to be like, yeah, it said B'tzad Sadehu. It didn't say like you need to be inside of it. You just need to be next to it.
Okay.
Okay, go on. Now, Michael, read a little more. Mana Timra.
Umna Timra de Chatzer she'ena mishtameret, Iomed B'tzad Sadehu in ilo lo. Titania haya omed ba'ir, ve'omer yodea ani she'omer sheyesh li basadeh po'alim shchachu. V'lo yehe shichach. Yachol lo yehe shichach. Talmud lomor. V'shachachta omer basadeh. Basadeh v'shachachta v'lo ba'ir. So like from where would I say, or from where would you say that for a chatzer she'ena mishtamer, that if the owner is standing at the edge, then yes, he can exert ownership or declare ownership over the animal. But if not, like, where do we get this principle that we just laid out?
Exactly. Now, there's Mana Timra. What is the source for the law that you just said. Perfect.
The Tanya, right? Because we have this breita that says if someone was standing in a city and said, I know that I have like grain, bundled grain in the field, and that the workers forgot about it. They forgot to pack it up and bring it. That shouldn't be shicha, right? Because I'm remembering that it's there. Right? Is it possible, right? Like, lest you think that it's possible that declaration would mean that that doesn't become shicha. Right? The pasuk says, and you, right, and and if you forget the grain in the field, or you have forgotten the grain in the field, meaning that it was in the field and you forgot it, and not that you forgot it while you were kind of already in the city later.
Great. So okay. So what does this price seem to be saying? First of all, you should understand
basically your like physical presence matters. Like this shichacha is presumably in a sadesha eina mishtameret, right? Where people, right, the needy can kind of like walk in and grab the shichacha, right? We're not talking about a farm that's behind a giant barbed wire fence. So it's a sadesha eina mishtameret where people can walk in and take the things that are hefker and walk out very easily. And in that case, right, if the owner were standing basadeh, was physically proximate, he could say like, "Oh no, that's mine. That's not shichacha. Like they didn't grab it, but I see it. I remember it. It's still mine." From off in the city, he does not have the ability to kind of set, right. Like he's exerting no physical control over the field in this moment, and he can't say from afar, well, because it's my field, I don't actually want this thing to be hefker. I want it to be mine. He has no way to enforce that in a sadeh she'eina mishtamer.
Right. Okay. Here, Lexi, can you catch us up on the Rashis up till now?
Sure. Okay, so we have Omer שיש לי בשדה, שנכתיב שם מדעתי, ושמחתי על הפועלים שיבואו, הפועלים שכחו, right? Like I left that sheaf there. I like intended for it to be gathered. I told them to gather it, and like assumed that they would bring it, but then they forget. It's not immediately clear based off this context how he knows that they have forgotten it, but one way or another, he knows that they have forgotten it. Lo yehe shicha im chazar b'shachacho, right? So this is the thing that, like, if that guy, right, like I told my workers to pick up that sheaf lying right there in this corner at this coordinate, whatever. I know for some way or another that they didn't pick it up. I'm walking in the city thinking, wow, my workers didn't pick up that sheaf. And at some point I'm doing my errands and I also forget about the sheaf. Right. And so Rashi is saying that's the scenario that our Breita is dealing with, right? That, like, I initially remembered it.
Right. Because it says Omer, because it's very strange. The Breita is really very strange. Tanya, Haya Omer Ba'ir va'Omer, Yodea Anisha Omer sheyesh li b'sadeh po'alim shachachuhu lo yeh shichacha. He makes this announcement. Lo yeh shichacha. It's not going to be considered shichacha. Right? That's what he's saying. Lo yeh shichacha. He makes that announcement. It shouldn't be forgotten. In other words, I remember it. It's mine. So what's the case? Lo yeh shichacha.
Right. So Rashi's saying this is like in case he then later forgets.
Right. It'll never be shichacha because I remembered it.
I remembered it when I entered the city. I remember it now. And so it won't be shichacha even if I forget about this half an hour later.
And then he says, then the bright race. Then the bright
Right,
goes.
and then the Baraita's editorial voice, you hold it,
L'chol lo yeh shechacha.
yeah, and then
Maybe
it
that's
gives,
really true. That
and then it
he.
gives the bisadeh v'shachachta. Im shachachto b'voecha min hasadeh haveshicha, v'lo shachachto mi shenichmasta le'ir. So first, Rashi gives what seems to be the pshat of this pasuk, which is now going to lead us into our problems in the Gemara, which is that the pshat of bisadeh v'shachachta seems to be, oh yeah, if you forget it while you're in the field, then it's shicha. But if you don't forget it until you're in the city, right? If you remember it when you enter the city and you only later forget it, it seems like that shouldn't be shicha, right? Bisadeh v'shachachta implies that it's only when you forget it in the field that it's shicha, right? But then this is going to now lead us to the contradiction that our Gemara points out.
In other words, let's go back with that Rashi. Go back and read the Braita according to Rashi, because we're talking about. Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like it might just be worth reading the Gemara's Kashya, because I think the whole point is that Braita read this initial way doesn't make sense.
Well, that's exactly what I want to point out. No, because the way Michael read it, it sounded like maybe it's reasonable. And you could read the Braita, it sounded like kind of reasonable. So I want to point out the problem with the Braita. The Rashi's trying to make the Braita be nonsensical. That's the point.
Right, because the Gemara points out that it's nonsensical.
Okay, so go ahead. Well, the point points out yes, exactly. So go ahead. Fine. Read the Gemara. You want to read after the Braita? Fine. But we'll still have to go back.
Yeah. But it'll explain it. So fine.
Yeah.
Maybe it's sorry, I'm just trying to find the place again. This Baraita seems to contradict itself. Right? Amart yechol lo yehe shichacha, alma have shichacha. Menasiv la Gemara bisadeh v'shachachta v'lo ba'ir. Alma lo have shichacha. Okay, so here's the problem: is that the structure of the Baraita, right? It's like a structure we see in Midrash Halacha a lot, which is like yechol da 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 Talmud Lomar, in which the way that setup goes is that the Talmud Lomar is coming to disprove the Yechol.
And not to prove it.
That's how exactly, it's coming to disprove it. And so Yechol lo yehe shichacha implies that we are now about to prove that no, it is shichacha, right? But then the Talmud Lomar of bisadeh v'shachachta v'lo ba'ir seems to imply that, yeah, something is only shichacha if you forget it in the field. But if you forget it in the city, it's not shichacha, right? So at first glance, the Talmud Lomar and the little limud there would seem to imply that in this case, where he remembered it when he entered the city and only later forgot, that it shouldn't be shichacha, right? Which is a problem because based off the lo yehe structure, our Talmud Lomar was supposed to prove that this is shichacha.
Right, but I still want to go back to the Braita and now and where is the problem in the Braita? Now, I understand that there's this linguistic problem that we should have said, instead of lo ye shicha, we should have said a different words, and then we should have brought our proof. But it's not just that the words are wrong. It's that the proof is not a proof of anything that we wanted to try to prove.
It's not just that it's not. It's the proof of the opposite, right?
Exactly. So show us how the Braita is problematic.
Okay, when we have a yechol blank.
But you got to read it. I can't just hear it outside. I got to see it in the words.
Thanks. So,
Tanya, from the Tanya.
Haya omed ba'ir va'omer yodeh ani she'omer sheyesh li b'sadeh po'alim shachu lo yehe shichacha. So again, this person is standing in the city and says, "I know about this sheaf," right? Which the way Rashi is envisioning this, like the Bal Habayit, I was in the field. I had a sheep in mind at this coordinate, and I was like, the Poalim should collect that. I leave. One way or another, I end up finding out as I enter the city, I still have my mind on that sheep, but I know they have forgotten it. And I
announce lo yeshechicha.
I'm like, I remember that sheep is there and that I intended to collect it, and so let it not be shicha. Even if I later forget about this. I remember it right now. And I'm declaring that's not shikha. That is not left behind produce. That was like purposely left to be gathered by my
Exactly, because we have to analyze this whole concept of lechet shikha. If I, like you just said, if I purposely leave stuff in the field and go home because I'm tired, the end of the day came, it doesn't mean it's shikha. And what about this? What about if I go home and then forget about poalim? I just leave it there as a pile, and it's not shikha. I plan on coming back to get it. And then I go home and I say, tomorrow I'll get it. And then I wake up the next morning and I'm an absent-minded professor and I go to university and I start teaching physics and I totally forget about this thing and I never go back and get it. What's the din? Is that lechet shikha or not? Did I forget it or not?
Right. So that's the scenario that is presented to us of like,
I
remembered it. And so the Baraita says, Yachol lo yehe shikha.
Oh, but what should the din be? I don't care what the Baraita says. What should the din be?
Again, I think that really depends on our understanding. Again, like going back to what you're saying, it depends on our understandings of shikha, right? That like on the one hand,
I think there's a clear answer. There's a clear answer.
This is something that was not initially like left, that was not forgotten. Like as
you just said it exactly. If I left it there, then I left it there with the intention of coming back. The fact that I forgot it afterward doesn't turn it into shikha because because of our pasuk. You have to forget it in the field. So you have to be in the field when you forget it.
That the Tosfot will also get into, but I think the problem, depending on how specific we're getting with this scenario, is that if we read that too expansively, you can end up basically eliminating shikha, right? That if we like expand this too
not at all. I'm in the field and I'm putting things into my agala, and I move from the bottom of the field, from the north side of the field to the south side of the field. And as I'm going, I'm progressing, collecting all the piled up omer, all the piled up sheaves. And I get to near the northern end of it. And there's still one in the south that I didn't.
But you're already saying as something part of what this break is also dealing with is we have a tension of when you have the Baal, the person who's in charge.
I know, but that's why I want to simplify it.
And
first.
You also have the Poalim, but that's the whole. I think we can't.
But we need to understand the halachot. We need to understand the assumptions about what is the din in a case where it's by myself. We need to understand like the basic assumptions before we can get into this complicated case of poalim versus the owner.
I am working my own field. I'm collecting things. I'm moving in a particular direction. If there's something behind me that I didn't pick up, it's shikha.
Mm-hmm. Exactly what I just said.
But now there's a problem of like, if it's about, I told my poalim to collect that. Then we get into the issue of how specific do they have to be, right? Does it have to be that like, I told them that omer right there, you guys have to get it, or I told them pick up all the omers in this corner. If me saying, that's not shikha because I told them to collect those, I don't even have a specific omer in mind, but I'm like, I know there's a bunch of omers that are like in that corner of the field. I told them to collect all of them because I told them to collect those. Even if they forgot one, it's not shikha, then you could basically eliminate shikha. Because you could be like, well, none of those are forgotten. I told them to collect all of the omers in that side of the field. And even if they forgot one, I didn't. I remember I told them to collect.
Yeah, that's what we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. But in the case of the single person, we can imagine that there's shikha, yes. And so go back to the Braita. Tanya, haya omed be'ir, va'omer yodea ani sha'omer sheyesh li b'sadei po'alim shachachu, and I know that they forgot it. Lo yeh shikha. He's saying it shouldn't be shikha in the sense that I still have my dot on it, and the fact that they forgot it isn't enough because basically it takes two to create shikha. When you have po'alim, you need both of them to forget. If the po'alim remember and the Baal forgets, or the Baal remember, whatever, or the reverse, I forget exactly what I said, but if the po'alim forget and the Baal remembers, or the po'alim remember and the Baal forgets, either way, it's not fully forgotten. So that's not shikha. So he's in the city and he's saying, I know they forgot it, but I didn't forget it. So even if I do forget it tomorrow morning, it shouldn't work. But it shouldn't be called shichacha, it should still be mine. So he says like this. So the Gemara, so the Braita goes on, Yachol lo yeh shichacha. Maybe this works. Right? Maybe it won't be.
Yeah.
Maybe
Could it
this
be
works,
that?
and it won't be. He just said lo yeh shichacha, and now we're saying Yachol lo yeh shichacha. Maybe in fact it won't be shichacha, which is what he was trying to do in first place. He was trying to say it's not shichacha. Talmud lomar v'shachachta. The Talmud told us, or the Torah tells us, v'shachachta, omer b'sadeh. You forgot it when you're in the field. B'sadeh v'shachachta v'lo ba'ir. You have to be in the field when you forgot it, but not in the city when you forget it. But the problem is that he wasn't saying I forgot it. He was saying I remember it. He was trying to say, I remember it. Lo yeh shichacha.
That's why
That's
Rashi
that's the contradiction, I think.
No, I don't think, again, certainly the Gemara doesn't think that's the contradiction. That's why also why Rashi adds b'chazar v'shachu. I think the very clear contradiction is the one the Gemara itself points out, which is that we know how the whole Talmud Lomar structure works. This shows up in Midrash Halacha all the time.
Exactly. That's exactly what I just said. It contradicts because you're trying to say, we try to say Yachol lo yeh shecha, Yachol liot, that what his statement works, and then we bring this Talmud Lomar that it does work. Wait, no,
Well,
actually, actually, right. You're right. I explained the Braita perfectly that there's no problem. You're right.
Right. The problem is that the Yachol implies that it is shichacha, right? The Yachol is like, the Yachol is saying, could it possibly be that this isn't shichacha? AKA, obviously it is. The Talmud Lomar is supposed to come and prove why in this case it is shichacha, why his statement doesn't work.
Exactly. Very good.
The drash seems to prove why it shouldn't be shichacha.
Exactly.
Right?
So wait, I agree. So wait, let me say it again. Yachol lo yeh shichacha. You might say that what he did works, that his statement of saying it's not shichacha works. Talmud lomar v'shachachta omer b'sadeh. B'sadeh, b'sadeh v'shachachta v'lo ba'ir. You have to forget it. In other words, you have to create a forgetting when you're in the field and not when you're in the city. But that wasn't what he was trying to do. That wasn't what the guy was trying to do. He was trying to remember it. I still say it's like that.
Well, I think the whole point is that like he clearly, the main point is that he clearly has not forgotten it in the field, right? That like even if he later forgets it in the city, he has not forgot. He certainly in this case has not forgotten it while in the field.
Right. He didn't forget it in the field. In other words,
like if he ends up forgetting it, it's after leaving the field and being in the city, right? Our Bright doesn't explicitly narrate him then forgetting it, which is why Rashi adds that in, the Chazar v'shachu, right? But we're saying clearly he did not forget it in the field. And the seeming implication of that drash is only if you forget it in the field does it become shichacha. And that's where our Gemara then gets to this seeming contradiction that our drash would seem to point out that here it isn't shichacha and his statement worked. And so that's why the Gemara is going to have to sort of reread the Baraita in a, I mean,
okay, so go on.
Less intuitive way.
So Hagufa Kasha.
Right. Well, so we read the Hagufa Kasha. So right, the Hagufa Kasha.
There's the Rashi on it.
That okay. So the Rashi, there's no Rashi on it. Rashi just picks up with the Ela Lav.
Did we read the Rashi of Abba Ir?
That's from later. That's after we get into the Ela Lav.
Okay. So continue.
Right. Elalav hacheka amar. Rather, is this not what the Braita is saying? Bisadeh shachuach mi karo habeshifka, zachor lubesof shachuach in shifka. My tama tekivan dekai gaba havile chatzero v'zachtale. Aval ba'ir afilu zachor lubesof shachuach havishifka. My tama Delete gabe delis kele. Okay. So rather, this must be what our Bereta in fact is saying. That when somebody is in the field, if something is like forgotten from the get-go,
By
and
whom?
Rashi's going to get into what something again. Well, I'm just going to translate this more simply, and then we'll look at the Rashi. If something is forgotten from the get-go, it is shikha. But if it is initially remembered in the field and then later forgotten, it is not shikha. However, and like, what's the reason? Because since the person is standing in the field, their field can acquire it for them when they initially remember. But in the case where the person's in the city, even if the person initially remembered and then forgot, it's still shichacha, because when they initially remember, they're not in their field. And since they're not physically present, their field can't acquire that sheaf that they remember for them. So now Rashi will help explain this a bit more. So he says, "Elalav hachikamar b'sadeh shachuach mi'ikaro b'chulei. Ba'od ha'ish b'sadeh, omer ha'shachuach mi'ikaro, shachuchu hu tchila lepoal/lepoalim, haveshichta." If in the field, I forget it before my poalim forget it, right? Like, I just don't notice it. I forget about that omer. In that case, it's totally shitata, right? I didn't remember to tell them about it. Like, it's just totally forgotten. In that scenario, it's shitata. Aval zachor shehini chosham midato ubesof shachachu al yedei poalim lo have shitata. But if I remember it, I was like, yes, go pick up that omer, and then my poalim forget. But I'm like in the field as this is happening, right? I point to that omer and I'm like, that omer is for me. I want you guys to pick it up. Even if they later forget about it and don't pick it up, it's not shichacha, because by me, the owner of the field, standing there in the field saying, that omer, I want you to collect it, it's mine, the field has acquired it for me, right? And so even though the poalim later forget to collect it, it's not shichacha because my field already acquired it. Aval ba'ir, mi shenichnas la'ir, afilu zachor lebesof shachach, have shichcha delete gabe v'chulei, v'hachi kana sivle tana letalmude, yechol lo yehe shichcha, Talmud lomar b'sadeh v'shachachta. V'odecha b'sadeh hu deba'inan de shachachte ata, v'lo ba'ir, lo ba'inan v'shachachta, she'af shachachta po'alim oseh ata shichacha. Rashi does an incredibly clever reread of the Talmud lomar, which is that if you remembered the omer, right? It's a bit confusing, some of the logistics of this situation, because it seems to be that you were never in the field. I guess like maybe you had a sense. It's not clear how specific of it.
It says ba'odecha b'sadeh.
No. I'm saying aval ba'ir, right? That from the fact, because if you were initially in the ear when that sheaf was put together, then you seeing that and noting that sheaf and saying I want it collected would already have acquired it for you. So when we say the zachor lebesof shachuach, it can't be a case where you initially were in the field, saw the omer, said, I want you guys to pick that up, and then entered the city. It has to be that you were not in the field physically when commanding them to collect that omer. Nonetheless, you somehow, there is some specificity with which you know a particular omer or particular set of omerim that you wanted the poalim to collect, and they end up forgetting. In that scenario, it is still shichacha, even if you have totally remembered, right? Even if you haven't forgotten at all, you, the Baal HaSadeh, totally remember that those omerim are supposed to be collected. There's still shichacha. And this is where Rashi does the clever reread. He's like, bisadeh v'shachachta. When you're in the field, it's only shichacha if you, the Baal, forget it. Right? While you're in the field, it can only become shichacha if you yourself have forgotten it initially. But in the city, it doesn't require vishachachta. It doesn't require that you forget it. In the city, even if only your poalim forget it and you remember, it's still shichacha.
Right.
And this is how it's a proof for the idea that, like, if it's not Mr. Merit, but you're standing by the side, it works for acquisition.
Exactly. This is how it ties into the Minatemra. We've been like, okay, this Baraita, initially you'd be like, why are we bringing this Baraita? This is super random. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about. And then the Gemara was like, well, if we read the Baraita according to its Pshat interpretation, it makes no sense. So instead, we can explain it this way. And the way we explain it teaches us something about this principle that you need, when you're standing by a Chatzer She'ena Mishtameret, you can acquire through it. But if you're not, right, if you're in the field, since
it acquires almost like the field acquires without your knowledge. You forgot, but the field acquires anyway.
No, but it's not without your knowledge. It's that when you're there, remember, like when you're there, it's that you initially remembered it. And when you initially pointed out, like, oh, I want you guys to collect that Omer, the field already acquired it for you even before they collected it. Right. So even though they initially forget, when you pointed out that Omer and you're standing in that field and you're like, you guys pick that up, you acquire.
And that doesn't work in the city.
Exactly, because you're not physically there.
So if you go back and can you read the Gemara from El Alav with insertions to fit Rashi? You see what I mean? In other words, read the Gemara, and then as you're reading it, throw in what Rashi is talking, how Rashi reads the Gemara, what extra words you have to add into the Gemara.
Sure. So he says, Elalav hachitamar, right? Rather, is this not what the Breita is saying? Bisadeh shachuach mi karo habeshichta, zachor lebeso shachuach in shichta. In the field, if it's
I want you to,
from the
I want you
get-go,
to add, I want you to like add Hebrew words. Or add English
my
words.
translation. I'm doing it in my English.
Yeah, okay.
Like if you
who? Answer my question. Who?
You the Bal Habayit forget
there you go.
from the get-go in the field, right? Like you just do not notice that Omer, you do not tell them to pick it up. You're in the field, but you do not pay attention to it.
So Mikaro is the Bal Habayit. Elalav hachi ka'amar b'sadeh shachuach mikaro Bal Habayit. Have shichacho. No, have shichacho.
But
Zachor who?
Right, according to Rashi, if he remembers it and tells them to pick it up, but the Po'alim forget it, right? The Po'alim forget to pick it up. Lo have shichta, it's not shichta. My tama, the kevan zekai gaba havdele fatzero bizachtale. Right? What's the reason? Because since he's standing in the field at the moment that he says that Omer, collect it for me, the field can be like his chatzer. It's, he's standing there. And so he can acquire the Omer through a Kenyan chatzer.
Right.
Aval ba'ir, afilu zachor u'besof shahua. But in the city, even if he remembers, right, he's in the city, he remembers that there's Omerim that like he wants to be collected, that he like has in his mind, oh, those ones there are gonna fall and be bundled, and I want them to be collected for me. But the Po'alim have forgotten to collect them. Nonetheless,
right. The key word is whenever it says the sof, it means the Po'alim.
According to Rashi. There are some others who disagree.
But that's what I'm trying to do. We're reading it according to Rashi now.
So for Rashi, he's reading it as the Po'alim, right? So like in the city, even if this guy has in mind the Omerim, the Bal Habayit remembers them. If the Po'alim forget, then it is still Shifata, right? Maitama, right? Because since he's in the city when he's like thinking of those Omerim and remembering them, his field can't just automatically acquire them for him, because he's not physically present, and it's a chaser she'ena mishtameret.
Good. So that's our proof. That's our proof that of this din. Now go on. Can you continue in the Gemara?
Mimai Dilma gzera takatufi dibisadeh nehave shicha ubair lo nehave shicha. So the Gemara is like, okay, actually, where do you go trying to argue that this is what's happening in our Baraita? That like, maybe it's actually just a Gzera Katuv that in the case of the field, if the person forgets it there, it's Shifra, and in the city, it's not. It has nothing to do with a person's presence in their Chater She'ena Mishtameret being necessary to acquire. Maybe that's totally irrelevant. It's just a Gzera Katuv, right? If you forget it in the field, it's Shicha, and if you forget it not in the field, it's not Shicha, which would still leave us with a problem of the Breita, but that seems to be the implication. Right? So look at the Rashi on the Dilma Gzera Katuv. He says, Demashma, Dibisadet Yehe Shichata, Aval Mishaba Bal Habayit La'ir, Ein Shichato V'Shachachta Poalim Klum. V'Hachi Ka'amar, Yechol Yehe Shicha Tamud Lomar V'Hule. Right? That the Gemara here does a weird thing of not only pushing back on the challenge that on the suggestion that this is teaching us something about standing in the field, but it's also like reverting to the initial problem we have with the Baraita of being like, no, maybe the Gzera Katuv is that when you forget it in the field, it's Shicha, but when you forget it in the city, it's not Shicha, which would still leave us with the problem of the self-contradictory Baraita. But that's what it initially suggests. And then the Gemara responds, Amar Kra, Lo tashuv lekachto, dirbot shicha ta'ir. Right? The pasuk said, like, you cannot return to collect it. And that comes to include the case of forgetting it in the city. That even if the person forgets it in the city, it is still shicha and he can't return to collect it. Right? That you can't say it's a Gzera Katuv that shicha is shicha if you forget it in the field and not shicha if you forget it in the city, right? That this lo yeshuv lekachto comes to include that something can even be rendered shicha when someone forgets it in the city. Now the whole next bit is going to get into basically a midrash halacha battle about how we use the different words. So do you want me to continue?
Yeah, I just want you to continue. I want to get to like 4 lines from the bottom.
Yeah. So Haimi Bayale Lilav. So initially the Gemara is like, no. So also, whatever, this will be helpful for a quick summary. I find it very helpful. Dina Weiss once taught me to think of Midrash Halacha battles as like parking spaces and cars that you're trying to park in the parking spaces, right? So initially, this Gemara was like the lo tashuv lekachto is a parking space that's available, right? It's like an extraneous bit of the pasuk where I can park my things can become shicha in the city car. But now the Gemara is like, that's parking space isn't available. We need the lo tashuv lekachto to teach us about the lav, right? That there's a lav, not only a positive of like leaving, but there's a lav of not going back to collect it, right? It's not available to learn out a different halacha. Then it says, in Cain, nemakra lo tikachenu. My lo tashuv, they're both shichata ir. The Gemara says, no. If it was only trying to teach us about the lav, it could have said so more efficiently, right? It could have said, don't take it, right? Why did it say lo tashuv lekachto? That extra phrasing gives us a second parking space in which we can park the things can become shichacha even when you forget them in the city car. But akati mi bayale likiditanan shelefanav ein shichacha shelecharav yeshicha shehu bebal tashuv. Right? That zaklal kol shehu bebal tashuv shicha kol she'eno bebal tashuv eno shicha. Maybe we actually needed to say lo tashuv lekachto. You can't just say lo tikachenu. It had to use that language to teach us this principle that something that is behind you as you're going down the row that you've forgotten, that's shicha. Something that's still in front of you in the direction you're progressing is not yet shicha, right? That something is only rendered shicha once it's something that you would have to literally go back for, right? So since we actually need that language of lo tashuv, that space is not available to teach this extra halacha about the possibility of something becoming shicha when it's forgotten in the city. But then Rav Ashi saves us. Amar Rav Ashi.
In other words, it's
Amar
almost
Pra.
because it's almost because it's a physical thing. In other words, what is the definition of shichacha? Is shichacha that I forgot about it, or is shichacha that in other words, what does it mean to forget about it? Forgetting about it is not a mental action. It's a non-action. It's a non-mental action. So what is the action? The action is having to go back. If you have to go back, then that's what you're not supposed to do. Why would you have to go back? Because you left it behind. So it's almost related to the lo tashuv kind of teaches us that shichacha is about action and not consciousness. All right, but anyway, continue. You have one more
So
sentence.
then, Amar Rav Ashi, Amar Pra, Yihiyeh lirbat shichata ir. Well, it also says that the Amar Besadeh lo tashuv l'kafto lager liatzom l'almanat yihiyeh, and that it could have just said something like it is for the ger. The yihiyeh, I guess, is technically considered extraneous. And so Rav Ashi says that's a new parking space. It's true that we needed lo tashuv for this whole shlifanav en shichta. But the Yehiyah gives us another spot to teach that something can be rendered shichacha even in the city. Therefore, we can't say there's just some gzeras hakatuv that things can be rendered shichacha in the field and not in the city. And therefore, we can basically go back to the creative interpretation of our baraita that supported this read about like standing in your chatzer ha'ena mishtameret.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's a very, I mean, it is a convoluted piece of Gemara there. Not, on the one hand, yeah, it's kind of unusual, but it's, I mean, structurally, it's not unusual. Structurally, it's not at all unusual. The structure is try to read a Braita one way, show that it doesn't work, then read it in a different way, which is forced a little bit, but the only possibility. And then the challenge is a bit strange, I think, because so now it's just saying, well, maybe the first reading was right somehow. Like you said, we sort of ignore that. The challenge, and therefore, and we're asking a challenge, well, your reading, basically it's like this. It's not that the first reading is right. It's that your reading is also wrong because those pasukim could have pasukim to learn this idea, not the way you tried to learn it. So your reading is also wrong, and perhaps there's a third reading. In other words, perhaps there's a potential third reading. We don't necessarily go back to the first one, like you could say. We're just saying your reading is also no good.
Wait, something that I think I didn't point out properly in the Rashi is that Rashi points out that according to the Gemara's challenge, the Makshan in the Gemara thinks that instead of doing a creative reinterpretation of the Baraita, we basically should change the lashon of the Gemara of the Baraita to instead of Yechol lo yehe shichcha, Yechol yehe shichcha. Right? And the Makshan thinks that you should just get rid of the word lo, and then the Baraita is saying, could it be that it is shichcha in this case? No, it's not, because it doesn't become shichcha ba'ir.
Where do you see that in the Rashi?
In the Rashi, in the Dilma Gzer Tekatuv, right? V'hachi ka'amar yechol yehe shichacha Talmud lomar. Right? That he's like, for this makshan to make sense, if they don't change the language of the Baraita, they would be back to our initial problem. So this makshan is essentially saying that we should go by the pshat interpretation of the Talmud lomar, and so therefore we have to change the language of the yechol. Right? That actually could it be that this is shichcha? No, it's not shichcha, because it's a gzeres hakatuv that you can never have shichcha in the city. And then we push back on that notion, being like, no, you can have shichcha in the city. Interesting,
good. All right, we have 3 minutes. Let's look at the very little Tosfot here. There's a very long Tosfot here, but I just want to look at the very end of it. You see this long Tosfos, Hani Mili? And then if you go down, like 6-7 lines from the bottom, it says Be'im Tomar. See that? Josie, you want to read that? I'll help you if you didn't prepare it.
Be'im Tomar, Perek HaZorek, which is the middle of Gittin. Dinatan zarak l'toch beita.
Tnan.
I'm sorry. The Tnan. So the Mishnah there says zarak l'toch beita o l'toch chatzera migoreshet. So if somebody throws a get to his soon-to-be ex into her house or into her chatzer, she's divorced. That's an effective thing. Mashma de mishtameret. Mashma de mishtameret. That this is what's considered mishtameret.
No, the house, your house or your the house is for sure, and the chatzer is also mishtameret. Vafilu hachi.
Vafilu hachi kamar ula. V'hu she'omedet b'tzad beita. And this is what Ula would answer. And
not answer. Ula specifies.
V'hu she'omedet b'tzad beita. V'hi should be right.
No, v'hu, and that case is the case of that she is. Exactly. She's standing next to her house. And this goes back to what we were talking about before. Why should she have to stand there? It's a chatzer mishtameret. We said that you only need to stand if it's a field, not if it's a house or a. Why does she have to be in the house? Why does she have to be next to her chatzer? Which seems to undermine everything we were saying. That we were saying that dafka by a field you need to be nearby. And here we see that no, everywhere you need to be nearby.
So we're going to respond to this. V'yesh lamar the dafka gabe get the ite bal korcha ba'inan omedet b'tzad beita ke'de'amar b'shmatin. So here that it's specifically with regards to get that she can be forced to receive it against her will,
and therefore
her to be standing next to her house.
It's therefore has a special requirement that she has to be there. But normally you wouldn't need to be in the house. Now, if you think about this Tosfos, this is also as the other Tosfos, this is also bizarre because it makes no sense. Why does this make no sense? Because dafka the opposite. If I can do this, if she can be divorced against her will, then why do we need her to be there? Her knowledge is irrelevant. Her presence is irrelevant. Why should her presence be relevant? We're doing this against her will. She is irrelevant to this event. I just throw it into her chatzer. She's divorced. Why does she need to be there? Because it's against her will. Therefore, she needs to be there. But in other cases, if it's acquisition, then she doesn't need to be there. It makes no sense. It should be the other way around. In other words, logically speaking, from a pure logically thinking about it, I would say that if she can be done against her will, then I don't need her to be there.
Well,
Baruch
Shekivanta.
Yeah. What?
No, Baruch Shekivanta. This is actually a very weird Tosfot because they're saying like Kida Amar Bishmatin. This exact point comes up later in our Gemara, and this is the initial answer that's given of like, oh, well, it's different because she can receive a Baal Korche. And then the Gemara says exactly what you're saying, which is like, okay, Kol Shekain, if like there's a matana, right, which you can only receive according to your will. And in this case, like she could receive something even against her will. Kol Shekain, she shouldn't need to be standing there for it. So then Rav Ashi, this goes back to our earlier conversation. He says the difference is it's because a chatzer is operating off of the principle of Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. And so that's why it can acquire a matana for a person when they're not there. But a get, which is considered to be a chav, like a loss for a woman, and chavin la'adam shelo b'fanav. You can't cause a loss to a person without their presence. And so even with the chatzer mishtameret, the woman needs to be there because it's like in chavin la without her presence.
And why does her being there help? Like still.
Well, again, you're allowed to do.
Is doing it against her will.
Well, no, but I'm saying the whole point. That's why she has to be there. It's because.
Why? What does it function? What is the function of her being there?
Can't automatically do something as basically her shaliach without her present because it's not ein zachin, sorry, ein chavin l'adam shelo b'fanav.
I
A
understand.
shaliach-
I
Remember,
understand.
so that's the whole point, is that it's b'fanav.
But it
like
is by
b'fanecha.
her. But it is
But
acting
if
as
she's
her.
standing there,
But she's not
if
touching it. It's the chatzer that's acquiring for
yes,
her.
but
Anyway.
it's still bifaneha. You're allowed to do it as a shaliach if
It
the
still
person is
doesn't make
there.
sense. It still
You're allowed
doesn't
to
make
do it
sense.
as long as the person is present. And so if she's present,
Yeah, but it's
then
again, it's
not
still an
shelo
arbitrary
b'fanav.
rule. It's still an arbitrary rule because why? Even if it's a chov, so she doesn't. So why should she be there? So she's going to yell, "I don't want it," but it's still going to work. So her presence is irrelevant, even if it's a chov. Fine, it's a chov. So all of a sudden, because it's a chov, she has to be there. But it's against her will. So who cares that it's a chov? Doesn't really make sense. I think Tosfos is just the only way you can understand Tosfos is just to say he's saying
But I
that
think
Gittin is
it's like given the
special.
way we use that principle of ein chavin l'adam. But it is weird.
Yeah, no, I
for
agree.
Tosfos.
Ein chavin
It's weird
l'adam.
that they give the explanation. Maybe
But
they
what is the
have
mechanism that the
challenge
get is
too.
acquired for her by her chatzer, if not by zachin la'adam? In other words, the chatzer is
It's a
acting.
shaliach.
Yeah,
But
but
the
she
whole
doesn't
point
even
is that
want
when
it.
she's
She says,
present-
"I don't want." She says, "Mr. Shliach, Mr. Chatzer, don't do this for me. I don't want to get divorced. I really don't want it." And it goes anyway against her will. Shliach normally is with the will of the person.
Well, that gets it back into our whole debate we see from the previous sugya we looked at.
But
There's
it's
a
yad.
question. There are some who are saying it's shaliach versus yad, right? And so if we say mishum yad itrabe, right, that in that case it can't be a shaliach against her will, but it can be a hand, and that's why she has to be present because it can only be yad when she's there.
Oh, now you're giving a good answer. That we're learning it from yad, and yad, you can't be a yad can't be a severed yad. It has to be part of you. It has to be connected to you. So therefore, you're there. It's not because of shliach. It's the chatzer is actually acting as a yad of the person, and she has to be present against her will to accept it because the yad has to be connected to her. So the presence of her by the field is nothing to do with turning it into shimur or anything. It's a totally different function from what our sugi is about, and therefore it's not a kasha.
Well, not necessarily, because that's the really interesting thing. The Rosh we didn't look at. Remember how we said that Rashi thinks the presence, the omed b'tzad sadehu, is that like the function is making it mishtamer?
Yeah.
The Rosh says, no, that's not at all what's happening. The difference is that a chatzer hamishtameret is functioning like a shaliach. But a person would never like allow shlichut to happen in a way that is fundamentally unguarded and unpredictable. And so a chatzer ha'eno mishtameret cannot act as a shaliach. And so what's happening when you're standing there is it is functioning as your hand. It is functioning as yad. And that's what's happening is just like yad has to be a case where you're samuch, where there's like this physical proximity, you standing there creates the physical proximity, right? So it's not that you're making it from a chatzer eno mishtameret to suddenly a guarded chatzer. It's that you're switching it from working as a shaliach to working as a yad.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I mean, we see yad by he's saying a yad not by gittin, but a yad just by any person. But it's interesting. All right, very nice, very nice. Thank you for sharing that. All right, next week will be the last class, and we'll go further in the Gemara. I think Joe will tell you how far we're going to go. Maybe, hopefully, it would be nice to go to the Mishnah. Maybe, Lexi, I think you expressed some skepticism about that. Maybe you're realistic. We'll see how far we get, but certainly don't go past the Mishnah. Okay, anyway, shukayach, everybody. Thanks for all of your help.
Shukayach.
Shukayach, laila tov.
Yeah.